Happy Sunday, everyone. This is Peter, and you're listening to another bonus Today in Context episode where I provide some historical context to the things happening in the news. Chicago is a disaster. Crime everywhere. Illegals pouring in. Time to send in the feds and clean house. No more weakness. In the September 7th, 2025, meaning today, post that's been viewed millions of times, the American president suggested federal intervention in Chicago, sparking widespread denunciations and fears of war on the city. He later walked it back, denying any plans to declare war, but the damage was done. Yet history shows us that these tensions involving American presidents and urban interventions are far from unique to the current administration. History, of course, does not repeat itself, but as Mark Twain supposedly said, it sure does rhyme. But while I have you, and before we dive in, make sure you check out today's regularly scheduled episode in our newest limited series about little-known or secret events of World War II. Also, this Friday coming up, my guest on the conversation series is none other than the renowned filmmaker, Mr. Ken Burns. Stay tuned at the end of this episode for a little preview. I hope you guys check it out, and I hope to speak to you again tomorrow on another episode of the History Shorts. Well, now let's talk about the history of White House intervention in American cities.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
President Trump's recent interventions, both in D.C. and the suggested one in Chicago, tap into a deep vein of American anxiety about cities, places seen as hotbeds of disorder since the nation's founding. To understand why this moment feels so charged, let us go back to the very roots of how presidents have wielded power over urban America throughout history. So let's start in the Gilded Age, that era of robber barons and rapid industrialization when Chicago was the beating heart of America's urban explosion. By the late 1800s, the city had ballooned from a frontier outpost to a metropolis of over 1 million souls, fueled by waves of immigrants and factory jobs. But beneath the glamour of the World's Columbian Exposition of 1893 lay simmering tensions, exploited workers, corrupt machine politics, and a press hungry for scandal. Enter yellow journalism, the precursor to today's viral outrage machine, the social media. Publishers like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer flooded newspapers with lurid headlines, exaggerating urban ills to boost sales. Anarchy in the streets, screamed one Chicago Tribune front page during a wave of strikes. It was a time when rhetoric could mobilize mobs as easily as marches. The flashpoint came in 1894 with the Pullman Strike, a pivotal moment in our tale. George Pullman, the sleeping car magnate, had slashed wages at his factory town south of Chicago without cutting rents, sparking outrage among his workers. Led by the American Railway Union under Eugene V. Debs, the strike halted rail traffic nationwide, stranding mail and goods. President Grover Cleveland, a Democrat but no friend to labor, saw it as a threat to federal authority. Influenced by sensational reports painting strikers as all anarchists and foreign agitators, Cleveland dispatched federal troops, over 12,000 soldiers and U.S. Marshals, to break that strike. The press amplified the chaos. Illustrations of burning rail cars and clashing crowds filled pages, much like today's looped videos of urban unrest on social media. The violence was brutal. In Chicago, riots broke out as troops clashed with protesters, resulting in at least 30 deaths and hundreds of injured. Debs ended up in jail for ignoring a court order, and the strike's failure set back the labor movement for years. More importantly, it established a key precedent: presidents stepping into local disputes to restore order, often amid heated public debate. The press of the day didn't just cover the story, it amplified it. transforming workers' economic struggles into widespread fears of overall chaos. It's kind of a reminder of how media can shape perceptions in times of crises. Jumping ahead to the 20th century, America's cities embodied both opportunity and tension. The Great Migration drew millions of Black Americans from the rural South to places like Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, chasing better jobs but encountering barriers like redlining, workplace bias, and tense encounters with law enforcement. By the 1960s, these challenges erupted into a series of urban riots that marked the decade. It kicked off in Watts, Los Angeles, in 1965 when a routine traffic stop spiraled into 6 days of arson and unrest, claiming 34 lives. Chicago faced its own turmoil in 1966 on the West Side after a white police officer fatally shot Paul O'Neill, a black teenager, during what started as a standard call. Word spread quickly through radio broadcasts and community talk. The old-school equivalent of social media, you might say, and soon crowds assembled, leading to broken windows and confrontations with police. President Lyndon Baines Johnson, the driving force behind the Great Society programs, followed these events with growing concern as similar disturbances rocked Detroit, Newark, New Jersey, and other cities. In 1967, Chicago saw another round after a police raid on an apartment killed 2 black residents. The unrest lasted days, with over 100 fires breaking out and the National Guard deployed to help. Johnson, a Texan with roots in everyday life, at first held off on the full federal response, but mounting public outcry combined with stark TV images of the burning skyline changed all of that. He called on the Insurrection Act of 1807, a seldom used measure that lets presidents send in troops without a governor's request. Armored vehicles patrolled neighborhoods, and curfews brought quiet to the streets. In the wake of the riots, Johnson's Kerner Commission issued a landmark 1968 report. Our nation is moving toward 2 societies, one black, one white, separate but unequal. It pointed to deep-seated racism, economic gaps, media images that often portrayed rioters in a harsh light as key factors. The findings were overshadowed, however, by the Vietnam War and tragedies like the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968, which sparked even more widespread riots. Johnson's efforts to restore calm, while well-intentioned, sometimes widened rifts, with federal presence seen by some as overreach rather than support. Meanwhile, the political talk heated up. Figures like George Wallace pushed states' rights and law and order, ideas that Richard Nixon picked up for his own 1968 presidential run. Hopefully what you're noticing here is that these efforts were not tied to one political party, but to both the Democrats and Republicans. Nixon, a Republican who won on a platform of bringing peace with honor both abroad and at home, viewed urban issues as a major challenge. In his 1968 Republican National Convention speech in Miami, he highlighted the agony of Chicago from the earlier Democratic convention clashes between police and anti-war demonstrators, which played out live on TV. In office, he launched a major war on crime initiative, boosting funding for police while cutting back on some city development programs. He took federal control during the 1969 Harlem riots and supported FBI efforts like COINTELPRO to monitor civil rights activities. A standout example was the 1970 postal strike, where Nixon used a Taft-Hartley Act to compel 200,000 workers back to their posts, even sending in troops to handle mail sorting in cities like New York and Chicago. The media coverage was intense. Long before Watergate, papers ran stories framing union actions as major disruptions. Nixon's approach resonated with his silent majority base, with polls showing boosts after these moves. At the same time, it laid groundwork for policies that contributed to rising incarceration rates. The trend continued in the 1990s, building on approaches from the Reagan years. The tough on crime focus reached a height under George H.W. Bush, coinciding with the 1992 Los Angeles riots, one of the most damaging in all of U.S. history. Triggered by the acquittal of officers in the Rodney King case, the 6 days of unrest left 63 dead and over $1 billion in damage. Bush started by backing local authorities, but as the situation escalated, he federalized 4,000 troops and Marines from Camp Pendleton. He even visited the devastated areas in protective gear, pledging a firm stand against disorder. The nonstop media coverage, including CNN's live feeds, made it a national focal point, similar to how today's networks highlight urban crime trends. Bush's actions recalled the Pullman response, deploying forces to end what was seen as anarchy, but updated for the era. This paved the way for the 1994 crime bill under his successor, Democrat Bill Clinton, which expanded police presence and prison capacity in cities. In Chicago, it led to tactics like widespread stop and frisk and gang tracking systems that sometimes, unfortunately, caught bystanders in the wide net. Public discourse played a big role too. Bush referenced the underclass in ways that stirred debate, much like broader warnings about national challenges in later years. Traditional sensationalism had morphed into 24-hour cable news, where phrases like super predators from the Clinton administration only added fuel to public concerns. Trump's recent statement fits into this ongoing pattern of presidents addressing urban challenges head-on. Now, platforms like social media, they accelerate these discussions, much like the rapid news cycles of the old, where a single message can draw quick responses from all sides. History, however, offers some balanced lessons here. The Pullman Strike eventually inspired protections like the Adamson Act for fair wages. The Kerner Report's insights helped advance programs like affirmative action. Nixon's bold moves had consequences as well, including his eventual resignation amid Watergate. The LA riots prompted shifts toward community-oriented policing. Whatever comes next with President Trump's approach, it's worth noting that the legal guardrails, like the Posse Comitatus Act, which limits military involvement at home unless specifically triggered. Still, these moments remind us how federal actions can reshape city life, for better or for worse, as local leaders adjust to the possibilities. So, things today are different, but I guess the question is, how much different are they? Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all again tomorrow. This week on the Conversation Series, one of America's most influential filmmakers of all time, Mr. Ken Burns.
Life isn't tidy. It doesn't fit into the binary systems that are media culture, 1 and a 0, our political culture, red state, blue state. Stories are complicated. In fact, I have in my editing room a neon sign, lowercase cursive, that says it's complicated. Because filmmakers, when a scene is working, you don't want to touch it. But we touch it all the time. We mess with it. We destabilize it. We make it less perfect because we're more faithful to what's going on. And what's going on inevitably in human behavior is contradictory. George Washington is deeply flawed, rash, and makes terrible tactical decisions on the battlefield, one after another. And yet, without him, we don't have a country. He's the only person you can say that about. Without him, we do not have a country, period, full stop. So I want to know that. This is what we know about ourselves, about the people we love. And somehow we've decided that in our politics and in our views of history that it has to be one thing or the other. It's not looking for complications. They're always there.